Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to the annual tradition of doing a top 10 favorite books that I read in 2021. Well, I guess it's not an annual tradition in 2021, but I try to do this every year. This year I'm going to do a little different. I'm going to separate my fiction books from my nonfiction books because I had an extraordinarily good reading year, I thought, and I didn't think it did any of the books justice if I only had 10, so I guess I had 20 favorite reads this year, and so I've chosen 10 nonfiction. And what I want to do today is talk about the nonfiction first. So the first nonfiction book I want to talk about is An Inventory of Losses by Judith Schlansky. And I don't expect any of you to remember, but if you remember all the way back to when I reviewed this book early in 2021, it may surprise you to know that I put this book on the list because I had kind of really mixed feelings about it at the time. But there are several things about it that really kind of draw me to it. One is I just love the naked hardback. I like the physical feel of the book, which I believe Schlansky designed herself. And then, even though not all of the essays, by the way, this is essentially a book of essays about things that we have lost, whether an island of the Pacific, a specific type of tiger, places, locations, personal history, perhaps privacy. It's essentially essays about all these things that we've lost, but not essays in a really traditional sense most of the time. And as I said back then, not all of the essays really worked for me. Not all of them did I see the point. Not all of them registered. But the ones that did really have stuck with me. And I found myself over the course of the year asking myself questions and remembering things from this book. And therefore, I thought, wow, that means it must have really made more of an impact than I thought at the time. So I thought I'd put on this list at number 10. At number 9, I have a book which I'm not exactly sure qualifies as nonfiction. This might be somewhere in that realm between memoir, autofiction, somewhere in there. And that's A Ghost in the Throat by Darren Negriffa. It's a story about, Darren Negriffa, an Irish mother and her kind of struggles with motherhood, with her economics, and her kind of obsession with the author of an Irish Keening poem and her exploration of that person's life, her research to try to find out as much about that woman as possible, to kind of rescue that woman from obscurity, and in the process, I think, to rescue herself from what she felt was like a life that was overwhelming her with work and details and kids, and this allowed her to establish, herself a little bit more independently, gave her something, and from that, by the way, she wrote a book which gained her recognition. Negriffa is actually an Irish poet, a lovely voice, lovely reading voice. And this book, really, I really enjoyed it, even though the first lines of the book is this is a female text. I still really liked it a lot. I think it's also the last line of the book. At number 8, I have George Saunders' A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. I buddy read this with Patrice Jones over the summer, and essentially it is a book in which Saunders, one of the probably most revered living short story writers, essentially attempted to recreate his creative writing class at Syracuse University in book form, and he takes us, the reader, through several Russian stories, stories by Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and I believe there's a Gogol story in here, and maybe a Chekhov, if I remember. It essentially breaks it down as looking at the story from a writerly point of view, and he actually gives you exercises if you wanted to be a writer, to write and to think about off the story. But even if you don't want to be a writer, it will definitely kind of make you read stories a little bit differently, think more about perhaps how stories are constructed. And I really thought it was good. From the description of the book, it may sound like, wow, that could be really tedious and boring. And I suppose it could, but Saunders is a very good writer. And he makes it not that. And it really does have that feeling of, being led through something by somebody who understands it really well and who really wants to communicate and teach it really well. And I really liked it. At number 7, I have Speak Silence in Search of W.G. Sebald by Carol Angier. This book is just, mostly on this list because I like W.G. Sebald so much, and I really enjoyed, finding out as much about Sebald as Angier could tell me. Now, Angier did not have the cooperation of Sebald's estate, and so there are gaps here. There's supposition here. It's possible that Angier is a little bit too enamored of Sebald and his method. She's very forgiving of him, but it kind of reveals a little bit maybe about the man, his motivations, the fact that he borrowed frequently in creating his strange texts or novels like Austerlitz, Rings of Saturn, and the people whose lives and stories he borrowed were not always happy about that. Kind of tracing his inspiration to things, and anyway, it is, a literary biography, and it does what a literary biography should do, and I'm probably forgiving it some of its sins because I liked its subject so much. Number 6, I have No Modernism Without Lesbians by Diana Suhami. This is a buddy read I did with Stephanie Cohen over the summer. It was a really quick, incredibly enjoyable read. Suhami's writing style is kind of light and breezy, but not, it doesn't lack for seriousness. It doesn't lack, I don't think, for scholarship. I believe she won an award for this, the name of which I can't remember right now, but it basically takes you through the really important contributions that several famous women who were lesbians performed or did to help create modernism, from Sylvia Beach and her bookstore and the publication of Ulysses, to Dreyer, to H.D., to Natalie Barney, to Gertrude Stein. It takes you through those women's lives and how they kind of created the modernist movement in literature, and I just found it to be really great, and getting to read it with Stephanie Cohen, just as getting to read Swim in the Pond in the Rain with Patrice Jones, just made it that much better. At number 5, I have Our History is the Future by Nick Estes. This is a book I read during my own, because I could never keep up with anything happens. I read during my own kind of Indigathon reading in April, I believe, of this year. And this book basically encourages attempts to rally Indigenous Americans, First Nations Americans, to continue resisting things like the Dakota Access Pipeline, to continue resisting efforts by local, state governments, etc., to encroach on their land and take things from them, by tracing the history of Indigenous resistance from past to present, which is, kind of the name. Our History is the Future, that the future of Indigenous people, of First Nations people in the United States, of Native Americans in the United States, is to continue that tradition of resistance, to go back to and to take inspiration from and to carry forward the resistance of their ancestors, of their forefathers and foremothers. And I just thought this was really powerful and really well done. I found it to be kind of moving in that way, and so I put it at number 5 on this list. At number 4, I have Cleopatra Alive by Stacy Schiff. This is just a thoroughly enjoyable biography of a woman who is incredibly famous, historically speaking, Cleopatra, but about whom very little is actually known. And Schiff does a great job of bringing together all the things we do know, creating from what isn't clear about Cleopatra from other historical records, creating reasonable suppositions about her and her behavior, and how she ruled Egypt, and how she kept Rome from dominating Egypt, and all those kinds of ways, right up until her kind of loss of power, or tying her interest to Mark Antony. It is really brilliantly written. Schiff is a great writer and able to bring real energy and life, I thought, to a subject. You might think that something that goes that deep into the machinations of Egyptian and Roman history and their relationship with one another might be boring, but it really isn't for a minute. I really enjoyed that. At number 3, I have number 3 on my list just for sheer impressiveness. I have Red Comet, The Short Life and Blazing Art of Sylvia Plath by Heather Clark. I just thought, this is an incredibly impressive work of biography. I can't imagine, even though at some point in the future, I can't imagine anyone doing more research and combing through or sifting through or looking through records and letters to get more meaning and create more connections over time of any person's life than Clark here has done with Sylvia Plath's biography. There are moments in which this is really brilliant. There were some moments I thought were tedious, but for a book this long, I thought it was incredibly impressive, and therefore I put it number 3 on my list. because it's just an impressive book, and it is a good read. It is an interesting read. It does, I think, Sylvia Plath's life justice. Clark is fairly even-handed in her treatment of Plath, and her husband, whose name just went right out of my head, poet. Anyway, it's just really even-handed. I thought it was pretty good, and well deserving being number 3 on my list. And number 2, I have The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. I was a little late to the Isabel Wilkerson kind of fanboy train. I read Caste first this year, and then I read The Warmth of Other Suns with Marion Ryan as a buddy read over the course of essentially, I think we started in October, September. We read it. It was just great to read with Marion. Wilkerson is really good at bringing together kind of her the actual history and historical facts and the historical record with really personal stories. And this book essentially traces the lives of 3 African American people as they moved from the south to the north as a part of the Great Migration at different points in time. Actually, one of them moved to California, not to the north, and what their lives were like in California or in New York or in Chicago, and how that relocation fundamentally changed their lives, improved their lives, but didn't necessarily create perfect lives for any of them. And I think Wilkerson just does a brilliant job kind of weaving their stories together with the larger historical record. And I thought it was really good, maybe occasionally just a little bit repetitive. I wish Wilkerson had trusted us a little bit more to remember some of the things she'd said. But I just thought this was really great, really enjoyable. And then my number 1 book, nonfiction book this year, is Square Haunting by Francesca Wade. Again, a little late to this party. I buddy read this in a group with Hannah from Hannah's Books, Stephanie Cohen, who had buddy read another book with, and Noelle the Book Rook. We read Square Haunting. And this book basically involves, kind of connects the lives of 5 women who lived in the same neighborhood, Mecklenburg Square neighborhood in London, and whose lives and work were connected not just by the fact that they all lived in the same place at various points in time, but connected to one another. All of these women in some way did something that connected them to the career of the others. All 5 of these women were in some ways trailblazers, in some ways independent intellectuals and thinkers, and they created works of history. They changed the role of women in academics. They created original and creative works of literature. They created new versions of the detective story in which women played larger roles, and their lives were remarkably interconnected. And the reason why this book is number 1 is because it's well written. It provides, I think, a great brief look at the lives of all of these women, and it accomplishes exactly what it set out to. At first, when I started reading this, I thought, well, the conceit that these 5 important academic women, Virginia Woolf, Eileen Power, Hilda Doolittle, Jane Ellison Harrison, Virginia Woolf, and Dorothy Sayre, the conceit that they all kind of lived in the same place just seems, like, wow, you just found out that coincidence, decided to use that as an excuse to write this book. But in reality, Wade connects them perfectly to create, not just around Mecklenburg Square, but this idea of this world in which women were striving and achieving and creating and contributing, and one kind of then led to the other, and they really had that real connection. So I thought this book was great. I really enjoyed the buddy read we did, and that's why it's my number 1. Anyway, there you go. There are my top 10 nonfiction books of 2021. As always, disclaimer here, these are not books necessarily published in 2021, but books that I read in 2021. And they are listed in the order of my favorites. Any other kind of criticism or requirement aside, they're just the books that were my favorite reads. Anyway, there you go. Look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.